This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it's Wednesday. It's November 8th, 2023. And we're going to do a deep dive today into my new book. This book is The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy, Exposing Woke Insanity in an Age of Disinformation. I'm beginning to do some interviews on it. It follows, it's volume 2 is what I'm calling the Great Awakening Trilogy. Volume 1 was this book. And you can see the Great Awakening Trilogy at the top of the page there. It's The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, Exposing Climate Lies in an Age of Disinformation. So book number 1 says that the woke movement, the hard left, neo-Marxists lie about energy. The global warming is carbon dioxide is a turning knob of the Earth's temperature is ridiculous. And any legitimate climate scientist knows it. This book, volume 2 in the Great Awakening Trilogy, explains why they lie. They lie because the left exists in a different psychological space than normal people. It has a different phenomenology, a different view of the world. The communications gap is huge. So when we hear things from the woke which sound bizarre, they are bizarre, but we don't understand the worldview from which they are coming from, or which they operate, which makes these ideas appear to be not only normal but compelling. The only true ideas, such that no other thought can be tolerated, becomes totalitarian in the far left. Third book will be about transgenderism, artificial intelligence, and permanent life extension, which shows where the globalists are going with all this, trying to deconstruct capitalism, destroy modern industrial society as we know it, eradicate God, and that's what it's all about. So this is a very important subject, and I am writing 3 books on it because I think that it's going to be so bizarre, the world these people want to create, that the average person is not going to want to live in it. And I think it has an awakening in that we begin to realize that without a concept of God, without a concept of the fundamental objective truth values that have been traditional to the Enlightenment, that we're going in a world of destruction and confusion and chaos and anarchy. And you'll see cities deteriorate as they're deteriorating now into Democratic Party hellholes. Democratic Party's become a neo-Marxist party, and it's largely abandoned the traditional liberals. You even see that the Jews who have been progressives are now having difficulty with the Democratic Party because they're realizing it embraces Hamas and it embraces the Islamic haters of America. Why? Because the woke left hates America too as a racist country. Now, how did it ever get there? How did we ever get 2 generations of Americans raised with these crazy ideas? And it's going to take 3 books to explain it, and it'll be comprehensive. I'm going to kind of leave these as a legacy because I think we'll need to sort this out for many, many decades to come. Now, I'm going to start this with 2 bizarre postmodernist thinkers. They're Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and they wrote a book called 1972 called The Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Those are the 2 geniuses right there, 2 French intellectuals. And there's Anti-Oedipus, that's their book. What they were defining is that the Oedipus complex, the postmodernist and the Freudian, Frankfurt School began combining Freudian psychology with Marxism. And they began to have a sex, drugs, and rock and roll to be the cultural revolution in which we abandon God, embrace drugs, and go to a new psychedelic world of freedom and love. So Pendergast and, Deleuze and Guattari were identifying that the Oedipus complex, this guilt over sex, and basically the love of a son for the mother, which is in a sense incest. It's the kind of incestual love which is really not recognized. Freud identified it as a deep psychological trait, which was fundamental to our sexual nature as human beings. And they want to, Deleuze and Guattari want to transcend this. They want to contrast capitalism and schizophrenia. They're saying in capitalism, schizophrenia is a mental illness, but where they're going, schizophrenia is their fundamental definition of reality, because the postmodernist world believes that there is no objective reality. We perceive reality through our senses, so it's subjective by nature, and that everyone's subjective experience of reality is equally valid. Your value judgment, my value judgment, those are the two geniuses again there. So Catherine Prendergast, who was a professor of English at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, in an article in 2008 that she published called The Unexceptional Schizophrenic, a Postmodern Introduction. It was published in the Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, which is a woke journal. Schizophrenic is commonly defined as a psychological disorder. It's a psychological state, though, that best describes postmodern reality. In other words, schizophrenics are believed to exist in their own world, in their own bizarre world, and it's not accessible to others from the outside. It's their own construct, and they can't distinguish between their construct of reality and the reality itself. So John Nash, the famous mathematician, was a film Beautiful Mind. It was about John Nash. He lived in this world. He was schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic. Felt there were people coming after him, and he lived in this reality in which he identified himself as an intelligence agent, and he was decoding secret messages that he was finding in news articles for the intelligence agencies. None of it happened. It was all his own schizophrenic reality. He was experiencing this in his mind, and he basically went mentally ill. And the movie's about his mental illness. Many of the characters you see in the book, or the movie rather, you realize later on were not real. They were just his imaginary characters. Okay, so Prendergast explained why the schizophrenic holds a place of honor in Deleuze and Guattari's book. So these two French intellectual geniuses, coffee shop intellectuals, decided that they were going to glorify, make heroic the schizophrenic. So Prendergast wrote, the schizophrenic is imagined here in the book, The Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, to be immediately recognizable with a disorder visible, and yet because not seen at the same time, invisible and outside the social order. So distanced from the public domain, the schizophrenic is ripe for appropriation by Deleuze and Guattari, who find in this figure their anti-Oedipus, rejecting the Oedipus complex, which is sexual repression fundamental to capitalism, according to the Frankfurt School and a lot of the postmodern thinkers. So she continued to say that schizophrenia is a particularly honorary, that Deleuze and Guattari have a particularly honorary position for the schizophrenic, in that without schizophrenics, postmodernity would struggle to exist within its boundaries. For the schizophrenic in postmodern theory marks the point of departure from the modern, the Oedipal, the referential, the old. Prendergast concluded reality is thus accessible to postmodern theory through the thought processes of the schizophrenic. So postmodern theory assumes that since we must perceive external reality through our senses, human understanding of external reality must also be subjective. So they reject Plato's allegory of the cave, All they see is images against the wall. They don't think there's any reality behind them of people marching with candles projecting this film. For Plato and Kant, they had a higher order of understanding of reality, which is the a priori judgments of that were hardwired with values, judgments, senses of reality against which our subjective experiences are tested. But critical theory, which is the critical theory was the code word for the Frankfurt School's reinterpretation of Marxism. Frankfurt School were largely a group of Jewish intellectuals who fled Nazi Germany, and they were communists, but communists with a bizarre hybrid combination of Freud wanting to be able to achieve the utopia by releasing the inhibited sexual impulses within human beings that Freud had identified. Freud believed that civilization required repression of uninhibited sexuality in order to form families, to form order. And the Frankfurt School felt that was fundamental to capitalism. It made us want to work, to sublimate our labor for other people's benefit. And they wanted to eliminate work. They wanted to free up all these sexual impulses and go to a utopian world in which the machines would take care of the nasty business of staying alive and eating. So in critical theory, results in schizophrenic thinking because the critical theory's underlying phenomenology derives from postmodernist theory. So critical theory embraces this idea that every individual's private languages, their solipsisms, all of these are equally valid. So instead of Descartes' I think, therefore I am, the postmodernist formulation is I think, but I'm confused. The non-binary, idiosyncratically defined identities, not binary, not male, female, anything that was a dichotomy like that was viewed as too limiting. These were all viewed as language games, the rules that constructed our external reality by constructs. And the constructs were either like Oedipal constructs, which we needed to break up, or they were post-Oedipal constructs, which was the leap away from Enlightenment thinking into postmodernist subjective thinking, in which there is really no objective reality. So this non-binary, idiosyncratically defined identities that critical theory generates would only work as imagined if the rules of external reality bent to our whims. Hegel had mystical thinking in that he believed that we were going to perfect through the progress of history this utopia. Postmodern theory is fundamentally a mystical doctrine that permits each one of us to magically create the world for everybody. Postmodern language of enlightenment rails against reason and science, largely because world wars dominated the 20th century, and they thought, if this is what the Enlightenment results in, we've got to reject the Enlightenment. Yes, the Enlightenment produced a world of technological wonders, cell phones, personal computers, transportation of millions of people across continents via advanced commercial aviation, and so on. Yet by presuming the Enlightenment would also advance human nature to produce a state of Nietzschean Übermensch, Superman, we made a mistake, assuming advances in technology would necessarily result in advanced human morality. What we are ending up with in producing postmodernist world of technological wonders is going to be populated by a woke generation that can't tell us what a man is or what a woman is. I mean, is that confused? Now, if we go into one other aspect of this that I want to touch on before really looking at this gender identity, postmodernism really involves a perversion of language. So under postmodernism, many ideas that have been regarded previously as objectively true, that we shouldn't kill, that we shouldn't steal, etc., became mere constructions of language. Foucault, who was a French writer who wrote about prisons and wrote about all the kinds of things of convention, also about sex, called all these discourses that construct reality. Another one of the postmodern thinkers that I cover, a guy named Lyotard, expanded upon Wittgenstein, who was a language philosopher. Wittgenstein was a brilliant phenomenologist, language philosopher. Wittgenstein said we were language games, that in postmodern thought, language has enormous power to control society and how we think and to construct the reality in which we live. So it's all about narratives. Creating utopian narratives is the heart of postmodernist thinking. Now let's apply this to what they call queer theory in woke ideology, coming out of the Frankfurt School. This is Judith Butler leads this. She was born in 1956 in Cleveland, Ohio. I was born in East Cleveland, Ohio, in 1946, 10 years older than her. In 1993, she began teaching at the University of California, Berkeley. And her seminal book is a 1990 book called Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity. And that's the book in which this Judith Butler she distinguished between gender and sex. They're not equivalent terms. A person's sex is their biological makeup, whether they have male or female sex organs and male or female internal organs. She distinguished that gender was a cultural construct, identifying a person's sexual inclinations. Thus, Butler insisted that gender was not binary, male-female, but involved a spectrum of possible orientations. Her worldview became post-structural, more than even postmodern. The distinction between postmodern and post-structural is highly technical. Both postmodern and post-structural are nearly synonymous terms. Each emphasizes viewing reality as linguistically formed constructs. Structuralism is social sciences theory and methodology that understands an element of cultures and society through the network of relationships that define how the particular cultural society element interacts with others. In other words, who's our Butler's friends? Who does she associate with? What is her network? Butler's influential conclusion was that gender is understood not by examining how sexual elements in culture or society network and interact, but through performance acts over time. She insisted the only valid methodology to comprehend gender involved internalizing her understanding of how performance acts defined gender. So she writes a very convoluted passage in Gender Trouble. So the performance of drag plays upon the distinction between the anatomy of the performer and the gender that's being performed. But we're actually in the presence of three contingent dimensions of significant corporal reality: anatomical sex, gender identity, and gender performance. If the anatomy of the performer is already distinct from the gender of the performer, and both of these are distinct from the gender of the performance, then the performance suggests a dissonance not only between the sex and the performance, but sex and gender and performance. As much as drag creates a unified picture of, quote, woman, which its critics often oppose, it also reveals the distinctiveness of those aspects of gendered experience which are falsely naturalized as a unity through the regulatory fiction of heterosexual coherence. In imitating gender drag, if you're following this, what she's saying is that, so you get transgenderism, which is, let's take a male who identifies as the gender as not necessarily female, but the gender is performing a male with male sex organs in a female cultural presentation, wearing feminine attire, dressing like a woman would do, modifying her body, his body, its body, such that it would develop breasts, that it would emphasize female characteristics, slender hips, changing the entire appearance of the person to appear completely feminine, yet have male sexual organs, and their performance in society is to present themselves as female but internally yet male. And if that isn't confused, I don't know what is confused, but that's what Butler is saying is how we determine what the gender of a person is, how they act it out. Okay, so if she concludes this with a sentence that goes on for quite a while, it says, in imitating gender, drag implicitly reveals the imitative structure of gender itself, as well as its contingency. Indeed, part of the pleasure, the giddiness of the performance, is in the recognition of a radical contingency in the relationship between sex and gender in the face of cultural configurations, of casual unities that are regularly assumed to be natural and necessary. In the place of the heterosexual coherence, we see sex and gender denaturalized by means of a performance which avows their distinctness and dramatizes their cultural mechanism of their fabricated unity. Okay, it's convoluted. But what she is saying is that transgender males in drag are challenging because their gender performance is a staged performance that acts out or imitates female sexuality almost as a parody. For Butler, sex at birth is not determinative of gender. A gender-born male may define their gender as female. A person born female may define their gender as male. In Butler's term, sex is a physical term that refers primarily to genital organs, where gender is a mental or identity term that refers to the acts in which the person engages that displays their sexual orientation. Critical gender theory has thus embraced the parlance of queer theory. It's not an offensive term because they are saying that Q, so it's LGBTQI. Q is for queer and I is for intersex. Intersex is a term that applies to those born with sex markers, genitals, hormones, chromosomes that are neither male or female. The acronym opens up a yet-to-be-defined gender. So the University of California, Riverdale has published a long list of these constructed critical gender theory, CGT, terminology. And in this list, you get a whole list of various bizarre kinds of combinations that people can, which include past lives, which include it ultimately ends up being LGBTQIA+, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer, intersexual, asexual. Okay, now if that isn't confused, and if it doesn't open up a bundle of problems, I don't know what does. So regarding queer theory and gender theory, reading another book, Queer Theory and Gender Theory, which I guess was her second major book. No, this was Ricky Wilchin's 2004 book, Queer Theory and Gender Theory. She basically made clear that the turmoil coming with consistent, generally agreed concepts as fundamentally as answering the question, what is a woman? What Wilchin criticizes is assertions that biology is not destiny. One is not born a woman, but becomes a woman. She required these statements, required women to assume maternity and femininity, such that the essence of selfhood, in effect reducing women to another stereotype, even if this time it is an entirely positive or a superior one. So she grappled with transgender male, boy-identified dyke, or intersectional female, genders on the margin of identity. She suggested queer theory and gender theory have adapted to accept the subjectively identified gender identities so as to make the offending, messy realities disappear. Now, the problem is these messy realities we're not supposed to recognize or criticize. They're supposed to be identifiable. And you get the picture you can see there, the queer theory, the gender theory. You get a picture, is that a picture of a man or a woman? Well, the point is that gender is the performance acts, and it's what the person becomes based on their mental configuration of their sexuality, which is not defined. It's more their gender, because sexuality is a term which is biologically determined, but not psychologically determinative. Now, that ties together with where the left is. And so therefore, when you don't use their pronouns, you're not respecting them. It's a microaggression. Now, the problem with this is, if we're going to live in a society where the schizophrenics are going to rule, it's going to be anarchy. Because even, so now the current debate is they want to eliminate reading in the public schools, To Kill a Mockingbird, which was a very famous 1960s book that defined a rape trial of a black man in, I believe, one of the southern states. And it was essentially someone who did not commit the crime. And it showed the confusion of, sex and race in the Deep South, post-bellum, after the Civil War, in modern times, in which these, black men were supposed to covet white women, and white women were afraid that they were going to be raped by black men. And that led to, that's the book. Well, today there's a move in the queer theory, critical gender theory, to reject reading this book, because a black woman might say, that book isn't about me. That's not me. That's not my problem. My problem is that, I'm a woman who is really what she's saying here is my identity is more of a boy. It is more childhood uncertainty. She fantasizes that I am really a boy within, I'm female, and that's the kind of gender identity confusion that has to be respected, because it is what she feels. And if she feels that reading To Kill a Mockingbird identifies a racial issue of sex, which she doesn't have, it is old-fashioned, out of vogue, and reflective of the Oedipus nature of sexuality, which she is rejecting. Now, if you followed me so far, what I'm saying is that we're dealing with a group of people who have internalized these ideas, and that the evolution of neo-Marxism, which was aimed at destroying the culture, have come up with this language perversion, which we construct this confused reality where the inmates are running the asylum and demanding that we adhere to their rules, when in fact, since it doesn't coexist with objective reality, produces a group of people who are confused in their identity. Supreme Court justice who can't tell you what a woman is because she doesn't know what the performance acts are of a person who was born with female genitalia until she knows what the person does. And that requires an extensive observation, and it could be very complicated. It could be a past life manifestation in another culture that this person is experiencing as their gender performance reality. The fundamental nature of this, I think, is so destructive and was concluded to be destructive. It ultimately makes white privilege the ultimate villain and elevates racial tension, saying that the white race is responsible for creating this Oedipus reality, repressing sex, creating capitalism, making us work, sublimating our labor, and not advancing and understanding an elevated society in which everyone pursues their individual sexuality as they choose. Everybody respects each other, and we define these terms by the nature of critical theory, critical queer theory, critical race theory, critical whatever you want theory. Craig, do you want to comment on this? Because I think I've covered pretty much of what I had intended to lay out. This book is critical in understanding these people, and I'm going to end with saying, how do we defeat this? Go ahead, Craig.
Well, I can tell you that I'm wondering if they're going to try to find more alphabet letters to fit into that line of. I think they're adding numbers to it now too. Isn't there a 2 in there somewhere and a plus sign?
Yes, there's a plus sign. There could well be anything in this. I mean, it gets so bizarre. I don't endeavor to keep up with it.
They're challenging Mary Poppins and Dick Van Dyke, the chimney sweep guy. Yes.
Yeah, they're challenging everything that isn't a schizophrenic approach to sex, and basically, this acting out. So the way they define transgender, and transgender is the new superstar. Now, the problem with transgenderism, the problem with all of this, I say the only way to defeat this is by classically, biblically, the fruit of the tree. In other words, what does this produce? So if it produces transgenders, this is why they're saying that, a male who identifies as transgender or as a female can participate in female sports. That, that what it does is it challenges the identity of a woman who's born with female genitalia and whose identity is female. It challenges the Phyllis Schlaflys of the world, who believed that there was a sacred opportunity for giving life that a woman uniquely had. These people want to even say a man can get pregnant, a man can have a baby. I mean, the bizarre nature of this is that when you watch the acting out of a gay pride parade, if that's the world we're going into, it is not going to be a very productive world. It's going to be completely messed up, and it's going to be a destructive world, because all these people can do is act out their fantasies, demand that you buy into them. And if you don't, you're the one that needs to go to thought reform. They're totalitarian. They believe they've come to a consensus, and this is a higher order. This is elevated human beings. And they include pedophilia, and they include every other thing you can think of, bestiality. The list goes on.
A lot of these are very selfish theories and selfish actions where they don't really care about what happens to everybody else around them or some of those affected. Let's take on the simple level the transgender male to female athletes playing women's sports. There's another recent report where a girl had her teeth knocked out because of a male playing field hockey against her made this shot and hit her face. There are biological differences. These transgender weightlifters are setting records, and it's leading to unfair competition. On the other hand, you're talking about pedophilia and these people who are very selfish, committing these acts for whatever reason they want to, and not caring what happens to the victims afterwards as well. These are pretty horrible people. This is something that's become a political movement without care and or without I should say without. I guess the best word is care for what happens to those who are being damaged collaterally or anybody else that's in the way of their agenda, if you will.
Well, following on to your point, it leads to grooming of children. So starting out of kindergarten, children are exposed to this and made normal. For an average child, this is absolutely confusing. Mommy, why is that man wearing a dress? And it's not the kind of, they're imposing these ideas on children who have no idea what sex is. They haven't biologically gone through puberty. They haven't gone biologically to the point where they can appreciate what a sexual discussion is all about. And yet this mindset is being laid on them as preparation for when they do become sexually oriented. Their bodies are mature to the point where they can experience sex, that they then enter into these behaviors as normal. That's the grooming part of it, preparing in advance. Chris?
The adults taking, or basically taking, the prospective recruit, if you will, the child, under their wing and push them a certain way. This is not job training. This is not teaching somebody how to drive a car. No, these are life-altering decisions that these groomers are trying to push young children to make, and oftentimes before they're old enough to realize what they really want.
Well, and then we get down to the military wearing dresses and modifying their bodies to look like they're female, and they become generals and commanders. Now, from the history of the world, that's been a bad idea. And the idea of gender confusion in the military force defines the chaos that these people intend to produce for society, because the ultimate goal of the people who architected this is the destruction of capitalism and the end of enlightenment and the reduction of human beings to the point where they can be they'll self-enslave.
And the patriarchy, I guess. That's the boogeyman, the patriarchy. It's always about that.
Right. Always attacking males. Males are the boogeyman, like white supremacy is the boogeyman.
I laugh at people who say, well, we need a woman president. A woman president would make things so much easier. I'll say, well, here's the thing. And look at world history. Women can be just as horrible as men. We've had tyrannesses. We've had women that. Oh, Elizabeth Bathory is one of them. I always forget her name, in Madagascar. Yeah, the Chinese empress. My memory pills need to be taken at this point. But the fact is, there were tyrannesses, there were female dictators, and even those female bad bosses. Just as much as there were males who did the same thing. So we're an equal society both ways. Let's put it that way. We can be equally great and equally horrible.
Well, we're human beings.
Right. There we go.
And women can kill just like men can kill.
That's true. And
women can lie just like men can lie. Women can commit sins just like men can commit sins. And there's no, this is a matter of blurring lines in language, which is always destructive. Let's wrap it up, Chris. This has been about the new book, Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. I think it will take a bit of effort to read the book, but I think it will be rewarding for those who manage to get through it, and it'll take you to a new understanding of the insanity we're facing with this critical race theory. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. This is going to be passing. It'll be marked as a period of human history that was a bizarre mass phenomenon, mass delusion, mass insanity. These mass movements are typically based on language perversion. They're typically based on ideas that are only partly true, but are repeated ad nauseum and insisted upon with a hard edge of totalitarianism. Dr. Jerome Corsi, we are going to go through a judgment of God. I encourage people in the spirit of 2 Corinthians 7:14 to join me in asking God to forgive us for allowing the world to get to this insane point, not opposing it sooner. And the remedy biblically is that God will hear our prayers and heal our land. It's going to take a God intervention in order for this insanity to become apparent to all human beings. Dr. Jerome Corsi today has been a deep dive, one of our deep dive sessions into these books and ideas. It's today is Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. TheTruthCentral.com. We're doing broadcasts every weekday. If you go to the website, you can find us on many different channels, broadcasting, live streaming on Rumble, BitChute, many different websites, and audio only on Apple Podcasts and many other places. Upper right-hand corner, you can see all the social media where we're on and choose the one you like. We also have archived on the right-hand side various programs from previously and some around themes, and you can get the free copy of this book the coming global crash and how it will create an historic gold rush. You can call the 800 number Swiss American. I urge you to do so. They're one of our major sponsors. The 800 number is 800-519-6268. I'll repeat that, 1-800-519-6268. Talk about gold and silver investing and what it can do for you. These precious metals are going to retain purchasing power as the dollar is devalued. The dollar becomes worth less, buys less. It's Dr. Jerome Corsi, thetruthcentral.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. God bless.